When there is an attempt to get closer to and explain what we really are, it is common to start from the seemingly separate person, and from there get closer to what the experience of reality is, to finally land in consciousness without separation. But this little film does the opposite. What does reality look like from the perspective of consciousness? To describe what reality is, I can start by realizing that I know it is not nothing, not empty, not zero. I know that I am, and that I know that I am. Always. Without experiencing, naming, or thinking anything, I know that I am, and that I know. Independent from what I am, and what I know, I am and know that. So, I can call it being and knowing. That's a good start. Only to illustrate, I can pretend that this being and knowing, that which I am absolutely certain of in my own experience, this reality is like a transparent cube. That is everything. The whole reality. Naturally, being and knowing is not a cube, but everything. Reality in its absolute, infinite, limitless, and transparent nature. And naturally without dimensions, without time and space. To be and know has nothing to do with dimensions. Out of this being and knowing, it seems like a form appears out of being, as soon as knowing knows about something. A form out of being, made from being, without an experienced border between being and the form that is known. Just like in a glass of water, when frozen, there appears an ice formation. The formation is of water and made of water, just like the form in knowing is of knowing and made of knowing. Now let's look closer at the form. To make the illustration clearer, the form is actually only an interface, an infinitely thin membrane in the same being and knowing. The form that appears is witnessed in being and knowing by itself. What I am is witnessing that the form appears. This limited form is experienced in something limited, let's call it mind. Where a form appears, the mind meets being and knowing, and this meeting is the form itself. It happens, appears, perception, that in a way meets this membrane that the form is. In perception, the limited world, matter, begins to exist in the mind, out of pure spaceless being. The existence of matter is borrowed by being. The background of matter, its reality, is spaceless being. But in this process of perception, being is seemingly veiled like an illusion if the mind does not recognize its reality. In perception, if the mind does not recognize this reality, space is created and seems to be the background of matter, the three dimensions. From the perspective of perception, being seems to consist of matter and space. Space is then called infinity. It happens, appears also thought, conception, that meets this membrane that the form is. In conception, temporary knowledge begins to exist in the mind, out of pure timeless knowing. The existence of temporary knowledge is borrowed from timeless knowing. The background of temporary knowledge, its reality, is knowing. But in this process of conception, timeless knowing is seemingly veiled, like an illusion, if the mind does not recognize its reality. In thought, if the mind does not recognize this reality, time is created and seems to be the background of temporary knowledge. From the perspective of thought, timeless knowledge seems to consist of temporary knowledge and time. Time is then called eternity. But the perspective of perception and conception, that reality consists of infinite space and infinite time, has problems. Space and time are not and do not behave like infinity and eternity should. They are insufficient concepts made from limited perception and conception, when the mind does not recognize the real background of them, and therefore they cannot correctly represent reality. This is why in physics they always fail when trying to find and describe time, space, and matter. The knowledge of them is naturally temporary and limited. Time is relative, and space is not infinite, and they know that both are in an inexplicable relation to what they call the observer and its velocity. At the same time, and throughout the history of mankind, it stands firmly and undeniable, what I really know, always and intimately, being and knowing. Mind, perception, and thought are events, a changing form in and consisting of being and knowing, and they are together what constitutes the experience of being a human being. Every human always knows the only thing that can be known, and every human testifies of, tells stories about, and expresses this same thing. I am, and I know that I am. I am that I am. But what is perception? And what is conception? What constitutes their reality? Yes, consciousness, whose nature is infinite and eternal, or rather space and timeless, that is, dimensionless, and not two, not divided in matter and space, not temporary knowledge and time, completely without separation. In unchanging space and timeless consciousness, all forms appear and always change. They appear in what I am. I am always the same, and at this moment I am experiencing a changing form, and in perception and conception my body and a world begins to exist. But they are not what I am, and do not define my existence in any way. All forms appear and are experienced in and consist of unchanging consciousness without any resistance. All forms, all unique, just like every snowflake is unique, but always is and consists of water. No forms can be better or worse than any others, and no forms disturb or upset in any way what they appear in and consist of. This form is perceived as three-dimensional in perception, as temporary in thought, but it is, and consists of, space and timeless, dimensionless being and knowing, consciousness. Forms may come and go, but what I am remains the same consciousness that is everything.